Todd, welcome back to the show.
Scott, it's always great to be here with you.
I consider you a friend of the show, it is great to have you on. And I just want to tell you, you've written this book, Embracing Alienation, which I have devoured. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was just awesome. And let me tell you, I lived it. The subtitle, by the way, Embracing Alienation, Why We Shouldn't Try to Find Ourselves. So yesterday I worshiped at this lovely Episcopal cathedral, and you talk about impinged identities in the book and in groups and how all these roles we play. And I was in the Christian world and the Christian role yesterday. Even though they tried to sort of talk about universal humanity, we knew we were, there was the in group and there's a us and a them.
Right.
Then this morning I go to the World AIDS breakfast here in Philly for this organization my friend works with, and I'm just on the subway. And you talk about the public and how the public just rips away the walls. So I'm standing there face to face, and the subway in Philly at this time of the morning, it's like 7:30. It's just packed.
Yeah,
we are like sardines. And so I look at the woman in front of me, lovely Latina woman. I say, "Isn't it just so interesting that we don't even know that we are this close and we're totally comfortable in silence?" And she starts laughing, and some other people start laughing. And I say, "Yeah, this is my friend just wrote a book about this, and I'm living it." And I said, "This is the introvert's dream cocktail party. What if we could just go like this and be at a cocktail party and just enjoy our shrimp and our cauliflower dip and everything and our martinis or whatever, or our boxed wine, and just didn't have to talk to each other and just stood there alienated."
Yeah.
And she was like, "Very interesting." And we talked for a minute. I said, "Yeah, my friend's book, he's talking about communities, and I just feel like I experienced it. She's like, "What's the book's title again?" I said, "Embracing Alienation." So I was selling books for you on the Philadelphia subway. Did I get the book or did I not get the book?
You got the book for sure, man. That is exactly it. I mean, I was at, this wasn't a subway, but the subway is, of course, the sine qua non of the idea of the public sphere and the alienation that constitutes it. But I was at a museum, and it was a Dali exhibit at the MFA in Boston, and you really could not move in there. And I thought, this is sort of what it is, right? Like, you can't talk to anyone. You can't, all you could say is "excuse me." But yeah, you just don't. And it's like the fact that the art was there, which was all these Dali paintings I'd never seen, that was pretty cool. But I thought the real experience was this. And I just thought to myself, well, that book really came through, like spoke to me in this instant. And it's funny because I wrote the book as like advice to myself, like I wasn't like, it wasn't like my position that I was trying to articulate. It was advice to myself. So that was, yeah. But well, I feel like, yeah, go ahead.
Let me just say, so I've been in a Seinfeld kind of moment because I social media just impinges everywhere in our lives. And I got in some Seinfeld group, and now, so all the time now I'm getting Seinfeld clips, and I watched the clip where they're actually living and narrating the creation of the sitcom. And George says, "Why don't we do a show about nothing? See, everybody's doing something. We'll do nothing." And then when they're pitching it to NBC, "Really, it's nothing." And George is like, "Yes, it's nothing." And Jerry's like, "Well, there'll be some story." "No, nothing." So I feel like as I'm reading your book, you're kind of saying that, hey, everybody's saying alienation's bad. I'm saying it's good. Is it a little bit? No, it's good. You're like the George. You're insistent. Alienation, not bad. Everyone's doing alienation bad. You're saying alienation, not bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, you said the introvert's dream earlier. So that's a way in which it kind of speaks from my own sense that I've always felt from the first dance I went to. I felt totally alienated to it. I think it was in 5th grade. And so I always felt like, well, that something was wrong with me. And that there was clearly, but I think that like to embrace that, it took me a long time to think that might be the path. But yeah, it's about like I think what you're getting at, your question is really fascinating because it's about the difference between form and content, right? Like what George is saying is like it's just the form of the show, right? The content doesn't matter. And I think that's what alienation is. It's like it's embracing the form and saying, look, all this kind of, we're so focused on the content of our, like, what do we have? Like, are we part of the Episcopal Church? Are we part of the people that are worried about AIDS at the AIDS breakfast? Like all these things, right? Like, and I think that the whole point for me was it's the form that matters, not the content.
And this is, and I want to get into the meat of the book, but I'm thinking about just stream of consciousness, and I want my viewers and listeners to get the sense of just how practical this is. I'm walking into the AIDS breakfast and I'm thinking, what jokes can I tell? Oh, wait, I better not be too Zionist. I better not be that. I can say I like Jews, but I can't say I like Israel. And I can make sex jokes, I guess, because it's sex positive, but I don't want to do anything too racy because it might be considered homophobic, or, like, it's all of this stuff is going through my head in split seconds. And I'm somebody that I'm an extrovert on steroids. I love strangers. I love social situations, and I'm feeling alienated, right?
Yeah.
And I love first dates. I love job interviews. Like, I'm a real masochist, and that stuff. And I, as somebody who feels pretty confident in social circles, just as I finished your book, I'm thinking I'm totally alienated right now. And yet there's a freedom to it, right? To know this, to be aware is to be alive. That there's something to this moment where you're aware of all this and you're kind of looking it in the eye. And that's, I think, right, what you're trying to get us to do.
Right, exactly. Because I think that's how you find out who you are, right? Like it's who you are is not all these different things that you feel like you belong to. I think that's maybe what I think is most important in what I wrote, that you find who you are precisely when you're not feeling like you're part of the group, when you're not feeling like you're that certain identity, or you're not, like those moments. And when you can't find the right joke to tell, like I spend a lot of time, more time probably than you, thinking about the proper joke, like to go into class in the day, whatever, everything that I do, I spend a lot of time on like what joke I'm going to tell, and even making up jokes, which, as you know, is like a really hard thing to do. It takes a lot of time.
But you've written the book on it.
I
Only
know.
a joke. You've written the book. I tell people all the time, do you want to know what's funny? This is the guy.
The problem is I had somebody write me who's a comedian, and he's like, your book has been a godsend to me because I use it as this thing to structure my jokes. And I wrote to him back, I said, it's not me, because I wrote that joke and it's not like a recipe for me. It doesn't work. Like I can theorize why a joke works, but it doesn't always help me coming up with jokes, And so, but yeah, you're right. Like I should have just jokes. I just think it's an art. It's not a science.
You have a Descartes joke. There was a professor of mine in my master's program who wrote the book on John Calvin and classical philosophy. I mean, it took him years to write the book at Oxford Press. I mean, this is, now it's one of those seminal books that you just couldn't address the subject matter now without his book. I mean, he's retired now, but it's that kind of a breakthrough book. Yeah. But he has this joke in a footnote. He went to the University of Iowa and he said, when I was there, they wanted to cut money from the veterinary school, and they wanted to cut money from the philosophy department to give it to the veterinary school. And the philosophy department was in an uproar because they thought Descartes should go before the horse. So you want to tell your Descartes joke about the Descartes at the bar?
Yeah, for sure. And can I tell you that I used that joke in a book, and an editor said, you can't, this joke is too corny. You can't. My joke was about the Inquisition, that the Inquisition kept trying to bring Descartes in, but every time they tried to put him in the coach, they kept putting Descartes before the horse, and they couldn't bring him before the Inquisition.
So this was not original to this is great.
No, I think it was. I just copied it, but I didn't know I was copied it. But I had several editors said that just, it's too, you got to cut that out. But the joke is, so Descartes in a bar, and the bartender comes up to him and says, he's been drinking a little bit. He says, "Would you like another?" Descartes says, "I think not." And he disappears. Right. Right. So that's a good Descartes joke.
For those who don't know Descartes, right? The famous is the cogito. I think, therefore I am.
I think, therefore I am. Right.
So one of the things I like about the book, right? Early on in the book, you get into Immanuel Kant and you say here, and one of the things you do in the book that I think is really helpful, you say, look, I'm not saying alienation is modern. It's been around since human cognition and self-awareness and this sort of thing. Yeah. But modernity does some unique things, certain things, developments in science and higher, Wissenschaft, other sort of critical forms of inquiry that make us feel a little less at home in the world and displace traditions and other traditional forms of relating that sort of, but you have this great insight where you say, Kant, well, in the critique of pure reason, maybe you're kind of determined. In the critique of practical reason, free will, and you say, and that's just it. They're both true, and you're not, and you're not trying to kind of square the circle. That's it. This is an example of sort of the alienated state, where the not at home state, where you have to sort of be acclimated, right, to the tensions like this that are just basic in experiencing the world.
Right. I mean, I think that's the greatness of Kant, just like you said, Scott. Like, he thought both were true. And so when both are true, then that's a very alienated state. And I don't think it's an accident. I think I only say this in a footnote, but I don't think it's an accident that Kant basically invented the term subject. I mean, he didn't really invent it. Like, I mean, as a non-grammatical, like as a referring to us, not as a grammatical position. And so I think that for him is what subjectivity is. It's like both determined and it's free at the same time. And then how do you live with that contradiction? And I think we've all experienced that. Like we do something wrong and we're like, well, I only did that because I don't know, my parents, whatever, pushed me in this direction. But then you have these moments where you're like, well, no, I could have done this other, I was free. Right. And so I think we have this feeling like we both are determined and we're free at the same time. And I think that's the great Kantian insight. And I think you're right. Like, that's what makes the modern take on alienation different than the historical one. In addition to all these scientific, displacement from humanity from the center of the world and that kind of thing.
No, you say that one of Kant's problems, because he can't conceive of a certain kind of alienation, a certain kind of evil. There's certain things that are just beyond it. And you have this great sentence, which I wish I would have written. You said, Kant's problem is that he never read Othello or met Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. So Kant did not believe in what he called diabolical evil. So he thought no one could be evil for evil's sake, right? And I think I think a lot of people still think this, and Socrates for sure thought this, that if you're going to be evil, it's because you have a wrong idea of what the good is, and you're pursuing that. But someone like Hannibal Lecter, he knows it's wrong.
Even Hitler, right? We just need breathing room.
Right. I think Hitler is not an example of diabolical evil. Right. I think Kant has, in certain ways maybe, but I think in terms of like evil, I think he doesn't have any problem understanding Hitler. But I think it's Hannibal Lecter or it's Othello who gives him more trouble, because like Othello just he pursues something that he knows is wrong and he pursues it anyway. And Lecter especially does, right? Like Lecter, I think, and the serial killer as such is a great instance of this just diabolical evil. And I think the problem is that I think all of us can really identify with this thing where we know it's bad for us. And that's part of what is attractive about it, right? Like that's part of that's the appeal of it. So I think that's what Kant doesn't, he lived his whole life in Königsberg. He never really got out. And I don't know. I think he didn't have a sense of, and I think it's I think that's a sense in which he's not fully modern, because I think it becomes much more pronounced in modernity. This I will something evil just because it's evil. Right.
Yeah, one of the things that I think I really enjoyed about your book is these sort of short, incisive critiques. You do it with economy of language. That's great. But your critique of Aristotle is great. You're just like, look, this is reductive. The idea that human beings are, we're a political animal, and this is just in our nature, and that's why we get together and do corporate pursuit of the good and that sort of ends. And you say this is not just not true, it's oppressive. That
Right.
if you and you just do this mini quick tour de force of all these reductive approaches to subjectivity and alien, and you think that all these things, this sort of modern reductionisms and ancient ones too, lead to oppression, right?
Right. Right. I think that I really feel like the attempt to eliminate alienation that's what is the main driver of oppressive structures, right? Like one of the things is like we can make these other people totally alienated, and then we can escape alienation. I mean, to me, that's the definition of something like servitude or slavery, right? Like, oh, I'm going to slough off all the alienation on this other group of people, and I'm not going to have any. I mean, I think that's what I think that's what someone like Elon Musk wants to do, right? Like he wants to, all the alienation is going to be on someone else, and I'm not going to experience it at all. So yeah, I totally agree. I think like that's the nature of oppression for me. I mean, if there's a definition of oppression inherent in this book, that would be it.
You mentioned Elon Musk. It came out a couple days ago that he was at like 3 a.m. He's responding to tweets, 3 his time. I suppose. I guess it was, yes, whatever it was. And people were saying he looks like these figures from World War I and stuff. And he says, 3 a.m, he says, "Yes, I'm a shape shifting vampire alien." And I thought, this is who you're appointing to have government efficiency. You're not even managing your time. Like you're at 3 a.m. responding to these things. Like, how are you going to make anything efficient?
Right. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. Right. I mean, I do think though that the success of, and I think it's important to see how what's happened in the U.S. has happened around the world, right? I think it's really tempting to say, oh, there's just some kind of like specific thing in the U.S. It's just not true. It's like this is a worldwide phenomenon of these like far right reactionary figures. And I think one of the things that's appealing about all of them is they all promise an end to alienation. I mean, I think this is I usually despise these like Marxism and the far left and the far right really are the same. But I think this is actually a case where there is a kind of similarity. Like one of the things that was appealing about Marxism was that it would end alienation, right? And I think that's the same thing that gets promised, like, oh, if we just get rid of immigration, then we'll end our own alienation, which of course is not true. Like getting like once you don't have that other person to blame for your alienation, then you just have yourself to blame. So it's far worse, I think. Like that I feel like that's a really something far that not it's not, I mean, maybe, I don't know, it's not understood, but the problem is I don't think that the people advancing this program, I think that it's really what we were just talking about earlier. It's kind of diabolical evil. Like it's not even a pretend. I mean, ostensibly it's for some kind of good, but I think it's really just about destruction.
I want to read out loud a passage. This is on page 32 of your book. I took a photo and sent this to like 3 or 4 people as I was reading this, because I just love this sentence. You're talking about these reductive approaches to things like desire and sex, and how basically the evolutionary biologists and other academics that reflect on this just don't get it. And you say those who devote themselves to sex do not invent acts that will best ensure reproduction, but ones that evince the distance between sex and reproduction. They try masturbation, fellatio, cunnilingus, anal sex, group sex, and multiple variations of these. Just as no overeater has ever binged on broccoli, no sex addict has ever overdosed on reproductive sex.
Yeah, isn't that true? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like that has to be true. And I feel like, I was once teaching a class and I showed, I don't know if you know the movie Gilda, where Rita Hayworth she famously flips her hair back. And the students, all 100 students in the class, they all said, not an exception, they all said, she's peacocking. This is just a standard kind of way to get the best mate possible. And I said, well, okay, there's a couple problems with that. For one thing, she would be a peahen and not a peacock. so you have to deal with the fact that in the animal world, all the flashy beauty is on the male side and not on the female side. So that's one issue. But I said the other issue is she's not looking to have kids, right? She doesn't want to have kids. She wants to attract someone sexually, to have like perverse forms of sexuality. She doesn't have kids. And I think like it seems to me like that never gets, and I think part of the problem is that, like our psychology department here at UVM, like they kill more rats than any other department in the university. And so I think to myself, like, well, are you really understanding human sexuality if you're understanding how rats act? I'm not sure you are. I don't think you are, because I do think animals generally are geared toward reproduction. But I think once you're in what I would call like the alienating structure of language, then I think all bets are off for reproduction. I mean, like, look, it's very possible, don't you think, Scott, that like humanity could, like, we have almost a children of men situation. Like women could, like in Korea, this is happening. They have this 4Bs movement where they're just they're just like, okay, we've had it with reproduction. We're not reproducing anymore. I mean, I think that's not an unlikely scenario for the end of humanity. Probably more likely the nuclear holocaust. So I feel like that kind of, like the idea that reproduction is somehow what drives us. Again, I think that's a failure to grasp how sexuality is alienation, right? Sexuality is alienation from our natural world, and it's alienation from what our society tells us to do. Because no one wants to have, like my parents used to tell me, sex between married people is a beautiful thing, right? That's what they said to me. And it was the hardest thing for me to even have sex after I got married, because I had that in my head. And I thought, that sounds terrible. And so for me,
yeah, it's like the evangelicals tell kids at youth group, right? Sex is something dirty and filthy that you should save for the one you love.
I know, it's great. It's great. So well put. Yeah. So I feel like that, that seems to me to bespeak perfectly this, like sexuality it encompasses our alienation, I think, almost better than any other domain. I mean, Freud would, of course, say that, right?
Yeah. So I love what you're saying here about, hey, are these psychologists teaching us anything about sex with the rats? You learn more. There's this comedian, Tori Piskin, who I now follow on Instagram. She's hilarious. She's Jewish and she lives in LA. And she said, she has a great Instagram reel. So you get these things in small, digestible bites. So this thing comes up a couple days ago and she says, so I go to a sex party with my friend and we go into the sex club, and she says, are you a dom or a sub? And she says, well, like, I'm a sub. Yeah, I'm a sub. She says, oh, so you'll just let a guy do anything he wants to you? And she says, well, yeah, but I'm a Jew too. So I'll be going, stop. That's it, right? I mean, that she would, or like Nikki Glaser.
Right, she can't even fit, Scott. She can't even fit into the alienation of the dom or the sub, right?
Right,
like that's the point. Right.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that. I mean, that to me this is the human condition, right? This awkwardness that you have to joke about it, to even get close to it, right? I mean, in some sense, right? You need things like humor. You need things to be able to get close to this thing. So this is a little, I'm really giving the listeners a sense of my reading habits and how I do it. So I'm late last night. I'd finished your book and I'm telling some friends about it on this social audio app called Clubhouse. And this one Jewish guy from Rockford County this is I'm like, the book is not for you, dude, because he's like, well, why does the guy use a term alienation? I mean, it's just so negative. And these other 2 or 3 people said, this book sounds really interesting. And they just say, Michael, the book's not for you, dude. And he's like, well, why did he write it? I mean, like Gary Wills wrote a book like Papal Sin, and it's about the cover-ups of this. I know why that needs to be written. Why this? But why do you choose? So you choose the term alienation, right? It's a little in your face.
Yeah.
Because most people, again, most people are saying we're down on alienation. I'm up on it. But why? I mean, because it's provocative, right? And there's a precision that's served by you. But why this lens, this take on the nature of subjectivity? Why use alienation?
I hope it's not perverse, because I think that's what your friend that said, why does he do it, is saying, like, this is just perverse, right? He's just doing this because it's against what. But there's 2 reasons, and there may be both too philosophical. But the first one is that throughout the 20th century, there was this incredible critique by mainly followers of Marx, about alienation, and seeing how their claim was alienation was the problem with capitalist society, right? Like Marx says this a little bit, but then it gets really taken up. And then my own investment in Hegel, I found what was really interesting about him. So in German, there's basically 2 words to talk about alienation, and Äußerung, which means coming outside of oneself, and then Entfremdung, which means coming at a distance from oneself. And for Hegel, those 2 things are emancipatory. And I just thought, we've really kind of lost touch with that totally. That like getting at a distance from oneself, or that's what alienation is. Obviously, it's the same. The English root isn't far from that. Like that there's something about that, and I also feel like the third key was psychoanalysis. That when you're in psychoanalysis, you don't know what you're saying, right? Like you're saying, like, and it takes someone else to come along and say, like, I was in a depression for about a month, and not that long ago. And I was talking to, she's not even a psychoanalyst, she's just a couples therapist. And she just said, the problem is you've lost touch with your depression. And that's why you've sunk into a depression. And all of a sudden it just clicked. I was like, oh my God, she's exactly right. But I couldn't have come up with that insight, right? Like it took someone else, someone alien from me, to see what was true about my psyche. And I think that's why I wrote the book. That's why I titled the book like I did, because I felt like it's only when you lose yourself that you really find out something that's really true about yourself. And as long as you're ensconced in this whatever bubble, or not even bubble, just like what you think you are, you're lost. And I think you're not gonna come to these moments of illumination that come from the alienation. So that's why I wrote it. That's why I titled it what I did. I mean, it was really, I have to say, it's the most personal book I ever wrote. There's a lot of stuff about like me playing football in college and just like
I'm curious, what position did you play?
So I weighed about 100 pounds more than I do now. I was an offensive guard in a Division III football team. And my dream, and this is alienating too, because my dream from the time I was a little born even was to be play football and be a professional football player. So I just wasn't tall enough. Like I could never be big enough. I was 5'10", so I just could never be. I was 240 pounds. So I was, for my level, it was fine, but I was never going anywhere beyond that. But that little football story. I mean, I was.
I want to read this. I'll read this. Okay. I'll read
okay.
this because I wanted to read this. You say, on this football team, which is your team, I guess,
yeah,
and many others, I assume, the implicit demand involved submission to a variety of homoerotic rituals in the locker room. These included players rubbing their penises against the naked bodies of other players, simulating anal sex with each other, engaging in performances showcasing their genital flexibility, to everyone in the locker room and grabbing the genitalia of their teammates, among other related acts. To be a member of the community formed around the team, one had both to participate in these activities and guard the secret of their existence. Now, I played high school football for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I think I wasn't in exciting locker rooms. I mean, this is downright tawdry. I'm like, I was in the wrong locker rooms here. I mean, this is very steamy. Were you filming? I mean, this is very...
No. You didn't have, there was no phone cameras at the time. It was in the 80s.
But you had this great story because you're like, then you have to be, and this is how groups work, right? To suppress alienation, you have these complex things. You say, like, you have to do all this homoerotic stuff, even if you're not gay. You're doing this stuff, right? You're just doing, but you have to be homophobic on the outside. So you show up with some gay rights oriented pink triangle t-shirt, and they're like, take that fucking thing off right now.
Right. The coach who would never, and this is a coach who, instead of calling us assholes, called us poop holes in the locker room. Like he went out of his way never to swear. He comes back to me on the bus. I'm wearing this pink triangle week t-shirt and says, "Get that fucking shirt off while you're on our function." Right. So, I mean, so it really, like, and he didn't participate in his rituals, to be clear. And it's not clear that he knew they happened. I mean,
but you're saying this guy who ordinarily might have more puritanical sensibilities, your transgression was so pronounced,
right?
At that moment, you so rejected the tribe and the impinged identity on you that he couldn't maintain his decorum.
That's right. Exactly. And I had done other things. Like I had almost gotten thrown out of school for acts of vandalism or whatever. And he was completely equanimous about that, supported me, no problem. But this was, and so that's what's really interesting to me, right, Scott, that he, like, this thing, he, like, it's just like totally threw him off. And I think it's because it violated that public homophobia that kept the group identity, the group identity as secure as it could be. Clearly it wasn't that secure if this is wearing this one shirt threatened it, right? I mean, that's the...
Yeah. It's I had this experience yesterday in this worship service, and the dean of the cathedral is the homilist. He's delivering this religious discourse, and he's talking about the known as the marks of the church, one holy Catholic apostolic, and he talks about oneness, and he says to this crowd of hoity-toity liberal prim and proper Episcopalians who just define themselves, you just hate Republicans, right? You hate Trump. This is part of it. God loves everybody, and screw the Republicans, screw Trump. So he says, we're one. The church is one, and that oneness includes the uncomfortable realities like Christian nationalists. And I look around, and I'm thinking, this guy's trans. That's a no-no.
Right.
And I'm going to write him, because I think I rarely experience anything rhetorically courageous and religious. It's just not, because of what you're saying, right? You're so involved in affirming identity and making sure, but that he kind of, I mean, it wasn't the most radical thing, but there was something about it.
For sure.
That I'm looking around and I'm like thinking, people were uncomfortable with the statement.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's I mean, you're right. Like, once you're in that situation, it's very hard not to speak in identitarian terms. But I think that statement really challenged that. It makes me think of this line. I don't think I put this in the book, by this scholar of rhetoric, Kenneth Burke, who said, "I know you're a Christian, but what are you a Christian against?" Right. And like, it's such a great line. Right. But I think, like, obviously you're not supposed to be a Christian against anything. Like,
right.
Christ isn't a Christian against anything, but the way that it's so often practiced is just like you're describing. It becomes Christianity against, it needs its basket of deplorables, right? Like it needs its, and I think I don't know if I mentioned in this book that Hillary Clinton line.
You did. Yeah.
That, like, she stole our line. Like, that should be, like, we should be the basket of deplorables, not the people that she identifies, right? Like, I think that really, that really bothered me because of exactly for all these, like it was about affirming an identity against this external enemy. And I think anytime you fall into that, you're falling into a trap that's obviously it's not embracing alienation, and I think it's also politically dubious.
Yeah, you throughout the book kind of bring up alienation's opponents, people that try to mask this over, paper this over, and you say the most visible forms of resistance to modernity come in the form of champions of tradition, those who defend an identity rooted in a particular place. And immediately I thought of Chesterton's first book. It's called Heretics. And, Rudyard Kipling says, no man can love England until he's left England, right? This sort of cosmopolitan wanderer, the Ishmael, the Melvillian sort of Ishmael, I'm an exile, I'm a wanderer. And Chesterton responds in this essay, no one can love England unless they've only been in England, right? This cosmopolitan distance created, right, by globetrotting the way Kipling is not how you and like Chesterton can turn a phrase and there's some beautiful things there, but that's the first thing that came to mind. This sort of Chesterton kind of, and Chesterton's more complex than this, of course, but in that moment, putting down the flag, or in the Stanley Harawas people, or the Alistair McIntyres, or the traditionalists that say, hey, look, this whole modern thing, the answer is you just grit your teeth, bear it, memorize enough traditional stuff, get back to your Aristotle, get the right liturgy, hang around the people, and all of a sudden you can kind of get past the things that, or suppress the things that modernity is unveiling, which is the alienation, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think clearly it's not confined to the West, but I mean, it's good to think of examples from the West. But I mean, I think that like Islamicism is exactly that same thing, right? Like it's an attempt, like Christian nationalism is an attempt to do the same thing. Like I see those as all part of the same kind of thing. Like how do I, it reminds me of, the T.S. Eliot poem, The Wasteland, like these fragments, these fragments I've shored against my ruins. Like, I think that the problem is that they don't see it as fragments. They see it as like a return to a foundation, right? Like we're going to somehow reestablish a foundation. But my point would be, if you're reestablishing it, it ain't a foundation, right? I don't think any of those things can ever work. Not that they can't do incredible damage. I just don't think they can ever work, because that foundation is it never. And this is you said before, like, I think alienation is not just a modern invention. So any attempt to like firm up some foundation is going to founder on the same thing that caused the foundation to founder in the first place, I think. So I think alienation is our destiny. And that's why again, another reason why I wrote the book and why I called it that, because I think that, yeah.
Did you watch Game of Thrones at all?
You know what? I think I'm going to teach a class on it, but I've never watched it. I know it really well because my whole family has seen it. But.
So I wrote a piece once about religiosity and anxiety in Game of Thrones. And one of the things I think that Martin does well that's interesting is he takes a pre-modern world and puts modern anxiety into it.
Yeah.
So the zombies and the thing, it's not just, it's they can conceive of everything dying, like the sun burning out, like this. I mean, they can, and so it's a modern anxiety that you're saying, and like what you're saying, it's not as though pre-modernity, these issues of alienation and anxiety don't exist, but modernity displays. So he does a good job of projecting the modern unmasking stuff back into a pre-modern world, which is what I love about it.
That's really fascinating, Scott, because I think that if there's been a resistance on my part to watching it, is because I'm not so interested in just depictions of the pre-modern, but that sounds like it's not really that at all, right? So that makes it, more appealing.
Yeah. So that you also talk a lot about how capitalism depends on repressing alienation, right? Racism depends on repressing alienation. That this thing that largely can you speak a little bit to that, about these things that like capitalism and racism that people on the left are often don't frame things the way you're framing them here.
Not at all. I know. I mean, I feel like that they're depicted as alienating, right? Like, especially capitalism, probably racism too, sexism also. But I guess like the way I see it, that if capitalism didn't hold out the promise of overcoming alienation, no one would invest themselves in it. I am firmly convinced of that. And I think I think sexism is maybe the most interesting and helpful one to think about, because one of the ways that it works is that that a certain kind of sexism depicted, maybe this is less happening, but maybe it's reviving, women as unalienated, right? Like keep women at home, keep them like up on a pedestal. Like certain women are alienated, like prostitutes that we sleep with, whatever. But basically, like woman as such occupies this unalienated position. And so it's interesting to me that a lot of feminists, like Simone de Beauvoir would be the first, but I can name a litany of them. One of the things they would do is insist on feminine alienation. Like that's what the second sex is all about. It's like, oh, sorry, like we're just as alienated as you. And not only that, we're more alienated because we have all these things happening to our body that are completely foreign to us. Like blood's coming out of us and we're like, what is this? We get this being growing in us and we're like, what is this thing inside of me? And I think she does such a great job of shattering this notion that the woman has this nice, like incredible bond with the child inside of her. I remember I had a existentialist friend who was pregnant, and she's like, I said, how would you describe it? She's like, it's like I have a beast sucking up every ounce of myself inside of me. And I thought that is a perfect description of pregnancy.
Todd, I'm shocked that line has never been in a folk song or a Hallmark Christmas movie.
That is shocking, isn't it? I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so. I mean, it's just. I'm
It's
tearing
beautiful.
up. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, you had me at beast. Yeah, one of the things you teach. So, I mean, you're an academic philosopher, but you teach in film and television, which is what I love. Some of the stuff I love about your work. And you have two great film analogies. You have many in the book, but one I love. You talk about Total Recall, which I think is great, and I like the Arnold Schwarzenegger version. I mean, but they're both great. But Arnold is just so great in this original role. But you say that this is what we all do. He's got this identity that's thrown on him, that's not him. He's grappling against it, and he can't start over. He can't wipe it away. And his subject, as the protagonist in the film, you're saying he's living in Total Recall, in extremis, kind of in real, deep relief or textured relief, where we're all living. Right?
Exactly, Scott. Because his entire, for people who haven't seen the film, his entire symbolic identity is just a fiction given to him, made up. So it's this guy named Quaid, Doug Quaid, and his body is this guy Hauser, who's gone underground as a spy to infiltrate the underground, which is successful. But at the end, he finally becomes Doug. He stays Doug Quaid, who's nothing, right? Like everything that he thinks he knows about himself is a lie. So I really think like there's a couple, like Blade Runner kind of flirts with that a little bit. I think the underrated film Dark City, I think flirts with that same
which you
idea.
mentioned in the book. Yeah, in a nice section.
Yeah, a little bit. But I think in those films, right, like they really are showing subjectivity in its purest form, because all the symbolic identity that comes along with it is shown to be a lie. And I think obviously for most of us, that's not exactly true, right? Like you really had your parents that you really had whatever siblings, you really had your partners, whatever. But in this case, even his partner wants to kill him. I mean, because she's not really his partner, she's just an actor, right? Like everything is a lie. And I think in a way that gives us in this distilled pure form what alienation and subjectivity is.
You have another great film analogy because you're talking about the public, and you say, what's different about communities like churches or synagogues or the whatever kind of our rugby team or your homoerotic Division III football team. I wonder how many of these guys now are at like drag queen karaoke or something.
I don't know, man. But
this
I luckily they're not like the most literate group, so nobody's gonna read.
No, yeah. It's yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you talk about like the nature of exactly what I was describing, right? The contrast between church and the public, where you're, in a subway, or you talk about parks or libraries where, our symbolic identities, these inherited identities, they're not really a big deal. Like, I mean, they're I can take the book out, whether I'm homeless or whether I'm Hasidic Jew or whatever, but you say, this is why Speed, the first one, is such a great film. It's not the no Keanu Reeves. It's Speed 2. In Speed 1, there's a bus, and the bus is public. So people are thrust together, just like I was in the subway. And you can have interaction, but you have to fight for it because you're alienated, they're alienated, and no one knows quite what to do in the moment. And and that is teased out really well in Speed 1. The second is on a private boat, and you say it ruins the whole premise because you're out of the public.
And I think one of the reasons I wrote this book, to be honest, is like the different reaction I had to those two films, right? Like, I loved Speed 1. I thought it was an amazing film. And then I saw Speed 2, I think the subtitle is Cruise Control, which is again part of the problem. And I'm like, what? I thought, right, okay, Keanu Reeves is replaced by Jason Patric, who's a very good actor. So it cannot be. And he has a good rapport with Sandra Bullock. And the plot is basically the same. So what happened? And I think the thing is, if you think about, I've seen both. I've seen Speed 1 more times, but I can recall almost all the characters on the bus. I can't recall a single character on the boat, right? Like, because they come together to form a public and they annoy each other. They're annoying, right? Like, the one guy talks too much, and Sandra Bullock has to put gum on her seat that she sits in so she can move and get away from him. I mean, the other guy is saying like obscene things, and everyone's like, do you have to be so obscene? And then, one woman like jumps off too soon and endangers them all. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen, but the fact is, as a spectator, I think you're really connected with them as part of the public. And I think that really, really resonated with me. And then when you turn into this private community, there's no bond at all. And so you watch Speed 2, you're like, I kind of hope the ship crashes and they all die. You don't really, I'm being totally serious. Like, you don't, whereas Speed 1 has this incredible jump that is totally unrealistic, but you're like, that's fine. You're totally into it because you're so invested in the people on the bus because they form a public.
Let me ask you, what do you do with Die Hard? Because there is it's not quite a community,
right?
But it's not public, right? It's the Nakatomi building. It's a kind of office party. So it's not quite as banal as Speed 2.
No,
right?
It's not. I think Die Hard,
but it's not quite a bus or something.
Yeah, I think the difference is, this is a kind of, I don't think you're going to like this answer because it's too kind of technical, but I think Die Hard is a Christmas movie. And so I think the Christmas movie is about the way the group comes together through the father's castration. And so to me, it's all about John McClane's, like, he's walking around with no shoes on. His feet get all cut up.
That's the best. That's the best. The glass.
It's the best part. It's what we all remember.
Detail. Yeah, it's a detail that is so key.
Yeah. And so it's about, and so the group bonds, I think, around his resistance, but he can't be this father figure, right? Like, he's not this successful father figure precisely because he's damaged in all these ways. And, he can't, his wife is leaving him. His kids don't want anything to do with him. He's like, and no one pays attention to him, the cops. And I think that's the thing that connects sort of everything in that film. So I think it's a little different kind of film, I guess, but it's a good example. But I just think, like, the Christmas film to me, like It's a Wonderful Life, is about of course, Jimmy Stewart's total castration. Like, I think like the community comes together over this failure of the father figure. And I think that's really, that's to me what makes the Christmas film so radical and why I love it.
Yeah, it's funny. I just saw a clip yesterday. I don't know how this is the stuff that comes through social media. And it's Bruce Willis at some roast saying, "I have something I must say." 3 years ago, Die Hard is not a Christmas movie, which is so great, right? No, it's it's because the absurdity. Because of course it is a Christmas movie, and you talk about this on your wonderful podcast, Why Theory. You guys have done episodes on Christmas.
Yeah, movies. We do. We always do a Christmas episode now.
I love it. I those are such great, and all my listeners here should right now, just if you're listening on your phone or whatever, get your pod catcher or whatever. All these terms, like the podcast app, Google, whatever. Get whatever and get on Why Theory, because it's just fantastic. So you have another thing that I just think about, because I live in center, like Philadelphia, right downtown. No private bathrooms, right? Like this, the lack of the whole public issue of bathrooms and this sort of thing. And I was thinking, as I was reading this, and the issue of bathrooms in public space, right? And one time I was in Houston. I was meeting somebody for lunch, and then I was waiting for someone else to pick me up, and I was right next to Joel Osteen's church, and I had to use the restroom, and it was a pressing urgency because I just had a burrito with all this, and I used the community in-group bathroom, and let me tell you, I would go to church there just for the restrooms. The thing flushes like a jet engine. And yet the irony of this is the guy right with these bathrooms that one in the last major hurricane in Houston, he wouldn't open the space to hurricane victims.
Yeah.
I mean, this writes itself, right? I mean, you couldn't write a Saturday Night Live sketch like this.
No, it's absolutely true. I think like the lack of public bathrooms is a real, I think these are real ways in which we flee, like the flight from alienation has real direct consequences in terms of the way people can live. Like I always think, whenever I'm stopping to give someone homeless money, I always think like, how is that person using the bathroom? Like that's my number one thought, like I just, and I feel like that's like all these homelessness itself is of course a way we've like let down people. But I think just as a society, like it seems to me like all those things are directly, for me, directly related to this failure to think about alienation as something that bonds us all together universally. Right.
I was thinking about, you have this great thing in the beginning of the book when you're like, somebody says, you talk about the unconscious and just basically how it drives us. We can't master the thing. It's always driving the car in ways. And you just say, if someone says, oh, your apartment looks nice today, or oh, and all of a sudden, was it dirty last time you saw it, or what do you, all these things or like, or you look nice today, and we start thinking, well, did I not look nice yesterday, or what, right? Like, I just imagine, are you walking around like a philosophically driven Larry David, or are you just always like what's wrong? Somebody says, hey Todd, I really enjoyed your book. Did your last book? Well, what about the book before that? I mean, are you just a tingling mass of alienated subjectivity, and just kind of, or do you just paper over that and are a nice Vermonter?
I hope I'm a nice Vermonter, but I don't think I paper over it. I think that I tend to not take it seriously. I think that's my way of dealing with it. I'm really glad you like the book, but I still think, like, in my heart of hearts, I think everything I've written is just terrible. So for me, that's how I deal. Like I just like, and that's how I deal with critique too. Cause I think like I get a lot of people email me very critical things. And I just think like they could never be as critical about it as I am. So it's fine. So maybe that's a defense. I don't know. But I just feel like like, and like a compliment about what I'm wearing, or I just have no investment in that. So that would be meaningless to me. So yeah. And people don't compliment my looks ever. So,
God, you're a
yeah,
nice looking guy. I mean,
that's nice of
you
you
know,
to
you're
say.
like a Vermont, like I bet eight. I always say like I'm like I think what you are in Philadelphia is a good baseline. Like I feel like I'm a Philly on a 7 on a good day. But I lived in Pittsburgh for 5 years. I felt like I was a Pittsburgh 10. But like I feel like I'm a San Diego too. When I go to San Diego, I walk
Yeah.
around like the elephant, like I'm
Yeah.
a man, not an animal. And I just think I walk around San Diego thinking everyone's so there have to be ugly people. Are they the
Yeah.
Morlocks? Are they under? And how could you like be a therapist in San Diego? Everyone, the weather, everyone's so good looking. It just would be horrible. But
Yeah.
I think you're a solid Vermont 8.
Well, that's very nice.
You know, this is I
Yeah.
just I'm really
Yeah.
trying to make it as
Yeah.
awkward as
Yeah.
possible. The interactions for
Yeah.
people that they're feeling it right now. And I mean, one of the things I was thinking when I was reading the book, because I've been in my life at different times, most of my life actually, I think, some sort of religious professional, and as a pastor, I've often encouraged people when someone is a mess, just don't try to solve it, right? Just be with the best thing you can do is be present. And what immediately somebody wants to do is solve a problem. Like you're going through tragedy. They want to give you an answer or they want to give you a solution. And I think that's all about solving their own anxiety, that their own alienation that they're not dealing with is getting in the way. So they can't just be present with the messiness in front of them.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's just it's so much in the name of compassion is actually sort of almost relational violence, because people can't just sit with somebody whose life has undertaken tragic, there's a tragic part of their story unfolding before them.
I couldn't agree more with that, Scott. Like, I feel like, again, like just to come back to what this therapist said to me, like, you weren't depressed enough. Like that really, and then that just kind of shook. Like if she just said like, oh, you don't have it, because this is what people have been saying to me, like, oh, your life is so good, you're a professor, you have all these books, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, look, those are meaningless to me. That does nothing to me. That doesn't, but her saying like, I think you've lost touch with some kind of fundamental depression that animates you. That kind of did it. And so I feel like what you're saying is exactly right. Like just be with the person, try to like accompany them and allow them to have their alienation, allow them to have their depression. I mean, I think those things are worthwhile. I mean, I think those are the things that make our lives worthwhile. So I feel like to try to cure those so that they're not disturbing the community that's the problem, right? Like to me, that's the problem.
Yeah. I was thinking as I was reading the book, I'm thinking, where does this happen? Where does the alienation on display in a healthy way, right? In a way where there's space for it. And I was thinking, it's not in most churches, it's not in most synagogues, it's not in most book clubs, it's not in most academic, it's not in faculty meetings or classrooms. But I was thinking, is it maybe, I don't know if you like ever been to a 12-step meeting, but
oh yeah,
is it in AA, right? Because people, there is this sense in which one day at a time, you're going to kind of be a mess.
Yeah.
And when you say, oh my God, I can't believe, like 2 years ago, I stole my mom's money. I lied about it. I did this. And people don't go, oh, right. And they just nod their heads. And yeah, I've kind of been, I've experienced. And there's this in good meetings. I mean, and again, these are finite, fragile human communal things. So they're not perfect. But I was thinking as I was here, I wonder if that's
an interesting model
where it happens, right? Because despite the fact that there is impinging on a day, but there's no precedence really. It's very flat. It's not, I wonder, is that a space where something like the group experience of alienation in the constructive way you're talking about can happen?
Yeah, I like that. I think that's pretty good, because I think that the way that you have to, and I think part of like to evoke the title, embracing alienation means accepting responsibility, right? And I think that's one of the things that's really crucial to those meetings, is accepting responsibility for the things that you don't feel like you meant to do, right? Like, I think to me, that's the key thing, like to see the way in which the things you didn't mean to do, those are you, maybe more than the things that you consciously willed to do. And I think that's like, it can even be something stupid like, oh, I left the thing open, or I left the car door open and the lights, the battery went out. And okay. So like, okay, you didn't mean to do it, but unconsciously you allowed it to happen. And I think that those kinds of things, and I think that the meeting is kind of like this, that you take responsibility for it. Like like Freud would say, like, the point of psychoanalysis is to get you to take responsibility for your unconscious. And I think that's what a meeting is trying to do, really, because like I don't think people consciously say, I want to become an alcoholic or a drug addict, right? Like, it's something that like unconsciously takes them. And oftentimes it's physical addiction. But then to take responsibility for that, I think that's a real step in what I would call embracing alienation.
I heard a woman once say, she says, she's this realization that she's talking about being a drunk, and she says, and I'm just out every night, and this is so hard. I can drink alone at home, and it's like I graduated. and you just don't hear people at that level of transparency usually, right? Because in most communities, and again, I've had my experience of this is primarily in academic and then in religious circles, you're trying to convince everybody you're something, right? You're this, this community. As I was reading your section on community, the last chapters on community, and I was reading it and thinking, yeah, what happens in community is the community's ideology starts doing identity work, right? And so, and this is where the problem is, right? I think you're talking about, right? Where all these, you're hiding from yourself, you're masked, because whatever the tribes in and out rules and ideology, they become the identity, and then and you're really papering over where the subjectivity that is actually freeing and can actually be transformative for you and the world.
No, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true that a community is trying to get you to take up, to make your identity aligned with their ideology. That's what a community wants to do. I mean, that's how it knows it's successfully interpolated you into the community when you do that. So, and I feel like that's why any time you feel like you're a member of a community, you've betrayed something essential about yourself, right? I mean, again, like, you can see how this is at odds with, say, Marxism, which is all about like identifying with the proletariat, right? Like, and I feel like that's maybe a problem with it. Like, I feel like it's only, I'm not against, obviously, I mean, I wrote the thing about the public, so I'm not against like coming together, but I think it has to be a coming together through our alienated status, or else then it can't be a community in which we lose what's most, singular about ourselves.
I just think of this moment in Curb Your Enthusiasm, right? Where Larry David's best friend and manager, Jeff, his daughter's boyfriend, he's meeting the daughter's boyfriend who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, as a military background, and they all go, well, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you. And Larry David goes, how you doing? And everybody is just aghast. And then he doesn't understand. And then when the guy leaves, even the soldier just looks, and the soldier has all these performative responses, right? Like, the real healers are still there and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And when he walks away, they're all like, you didn't thank him for his service. Right. But that's it, right? It's this, but this is beautiful moment when he just wouldn't do it. Just wouldn't thank the guy for his service.
He wouldn't. I mean, I think you're right that Larry David is a great example of someone who embraces his alienation, because he doesn't do the thing that the ideology demands. Like that thank you for your service is like that's a sign that you're part of the community, right? Like, or like taking off your hat for the national, like all these things, right? Like, and if you don't do them, you're suspect in the community. Just like wearing the shirt on the bus, right? Like you're not you're when I was doing in college, like it makes you suspect as part of the community. And I think that's real, like, okay, like again, it's not just to be counter the community, because there is a kind of, you can imagine a perverse response that's just like, oh, I'm just going to be counter everything. But it's saying like, no, I'm just going to follow what I think is right. And I'm not going to necessarily be capitulating to the demands of the community. I think of that Spike Lee movie, Do the Right Thing. And I think like, what does that mean? Do the right thing. And I think it means don't capitulate to the community. That's what I think. To me, that's what do the right thing means. It means don't capitulate to the community.
But and you're quite clear that, of course, you're going to be parts of communities, that this is just inevitable.
Right.
The human condition, right. You can't avoid this, but it's the way you are there, the way you participate, and this not at homeness is not something to run from. That's actually the relative. If you can be at ease with the unease, then there's something there. Then
that's the absolute key. I was just because this will make sense to you and probably your listeners. Like, I think you have to be in the community, but not of the community, right? Like,
right. This is what you're in.
Yeah.
Gospel of John stuff, right?
Yeah.
To be the problem most Christians is they're of the world, not in it.
Not in it, right? I know.
Because in like John, the world is the worst of everything, right? So they're of the world, right? They take the worst of the avoidance of the alienation, but they're not in it.
They're not in it. I know. They completely reversed the John's admonition.
But I often find as a Christian, it's almost just the nature of the thing. It's almost like, and I say this to somebody who's guilty of it. I'm not saying I'm better than any Christians or anything like that, but I still self-identify as a Christian until I'm kicked out of the team or kicked off the team or whatever, which maybe I'll wear the t-shirt someday,
but it's on a team, hopefully, right? Like,
right.
Isn't that the whole idea of Christianity?
Yeah. It should be
the beauty of it. Right.
Yeah. But there is this, there is this sense that you hold things loosely, and you see in the New Testament, right? You're called it, there's this great thing in the Hebrews, we're aliens and strangers. We seek a city with foundations, right? There's this sense in which there's a pilgrim identity. Like the New Testament authors run with this exilic thing, right? They take Israel in exile and they say, okay, that's what the followers of Jesus are now, right? They're living in this exilic existence, right? And so I was reading your book as a Christian. I'm thinking, can I baptize this? What can I do with Todd McGowan? Maybe I'll baptize him someday, right? With the super soaker. Now, I'm thinking, and I think maybe in some sort of Lutheranism, right? Maybe, so what happens is Luther, I think, comes along, and in the medieval system, right? You're either sinner or saint, sinner or saint, sinner or saint. You go and okay, and famously Luther was like, oh gosh, like his confessor was like, would you just get over yourself? Like, I just can't, I don't want to hear your confession anymore. Like this is. And Luther finally says the Simo Justus et peccata, right? We're all at the same time sinner and saint, and it never goes away, right? And this is, and God is dead, right? These equal and ultimate realities, right? And so it's no secret, right, that all these things you're quoting, Kant, Hegel, we see this in Nietzsche. All this, the guy, it's all on Lutheran soil.
Yeah.
Where Luther is pretty comfortable with these paradoxes. He's pretty comfortable. And Zizek sees this too about Christianity, right? He likes this, even though he's an atheist, he likes this dialectic in Christianity. Is that where Christianity could get away from the sort of escapism in the afterlife and be serviceable for what you think, if it's a little more focused on this, the existential dilemma of the sinner saint? Absolutely. And sort of seeing and the grace of God being the thing that's saying you can accept this, you can look at the mess that you are, and it's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Christianity is the I mean, I think Christianity is certainly behind the book I wrote on Hegel, but it's maybe behind every book that I wrote. I mean, like the book on comedy, like isn't Christianity the ultimate comedy? Because it takes the ultimate power and identifies it with the most humiliating position of all. Like that's what comedy does, I think. So I feel like Christianity is paradigmatic for me in this book, because I think like Christ is God's alienation, right? So and I think Christ has to, like, even when he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Like he's saying, like, can I like it's hard for Christ to embrace alienation, right? Like that's what it is. That's what it means to be Christian, is to in some way be forsaken by God. Like that's what Christ endured. So I feel like I feel like that's exactly the Christian message is this. I don't think this book is outside of the Christian orbit in any way at all, right? Like I think that the problem is when Christianity becomes identitarian, then it unleashes. Well, I mean, maybe it's the worst world religion when it becomes identitarian. I think that's a possibility, precisely because I have a friend of mine who argues Christianity is the best religion theoretically, but then when it falls, it becomes the worst just because it was the best theoretically, right? And I think that maybe there's something to that. But
It's like Starbucks is great in Seattle
yeah,
when and then once it becomes capitalism and McCoffee, and it ruins the thing.
it totally ruins it. Yeah.
I always said that to my friends, like they're like, well, what do you do as a Christian with all these wackos? I'm like, well, we have the biggest market share. You're gonna get Islam is catching up.
Yeah,
But when you have the biggest market share, you're gonna have more wackos. It's just
Islam,
you're a victim of your success.
Right. Islam is catching up. Right. And Judaism is not far behind right now.
Disproportionate for its size. Todd, let me ask you this. You're saying this book is not far from Christianity. Do you want to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior?
I think I see myself as Christian, Scott. So
there you go.
So, yeah.
I didn't even know that.
You didn't know that? Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't see you. I didn't know that. Do you worship at a community?
I don't go to. It would be hard for me to go to a church, so I do my own little private things. So
look at that. We've been friendly for a couple of years. We exchange messages now and again. I didn't know that. Yeah. That there you go. Yeah. I mean, this is. I'm speechless, which is rare right now.
Yeah, well, my sons are like, you can't call yourself Christian because you're so, you don't think. But I'm like, look, just like you said, it's kind of like a big thing. So, I mean, I just feel like, here's why. I feel like it's the only way of thinking even that manages to capture that has a figure of the absolute that's divided. And just what I was saying before, this identity of the highest and the lowest, to me, is there's a truth in that, and I think that's been very like whatever.
People ask me that.
Yeah, go ahead.
People ask me that, like, Scott, what keeps you in the game? And I often see some like this story, and sort of the reality that emanates from it. I just couldn't. Right now, I can't escape it. Right. I can't exactly what you're talking about, the high, the low, the God and death, the dialectical thing. It's the ultimate dialectic. And it's funny, like you say in your book about humor, it's funny if you get now Jews have the best comedians hands down, but really Christianity, it's hilarious.
Right.
If you get into it.
The main story itself is funny, right? Like the whole structure is funny. Right. But you're right. Jews have the best comedians because but don't you think it's because they're kind of like anticipating Christianity, because the Jewish God is constantly fucking up, right? Like the Jewish God is almost a Christian God, I think. Yeah. And that's why they're funny.
I don't know. Do you know this streaming show called The Chosen?
I don't know.
Have you heard of this? It's put out by evangelicals, but it's a serial drama about Jesus. So it's great because it has biblical stories and stuff, but it fills in a lot of gaps, like historical fiction. And there's this one great part where he's just like, Jesus is, look, he's asking Peter's wife, can I take him on the road with me? He's like, look, I know part of you because I've been around Simon, and you're probably like, please take him for a while. But and then he's about to give the Sermon on the Mount, right? And he's with the women and like backstage, right? He's behind them, and he's like, the blue or the red?
Is it meant to be funny?
No, yes. I mean, yes. No, I mean, it's interesting. It's the most Semitic Jesus I've ever seen.
Oh.
Yes. I mean, I think they actually bring, it's dramatic too and quite serious, and there's quite moving parts of it that are tearjerkers. I've sent it to Jewish friends, and they're like, "What do you think of this? Like, this is it, like, because how do you, as a Jew, do you see the more Jewishness in this?" And but it gets the range of Jesus that I think actually would have made him compelling. Like, I think that the problem with a lot of the screen portrayals of Jesus is nobody would have followed this guy. This guy would have been a crap. This he wouldn't be an extra in a Brad Pitt film. He just wouldn't, but this Jesus, you could see, okay, this guy would draw crowds.
Have you seen the Buñuel film, The Milky Way?
No.
Because it's about two different stories, but one of the stories is about Christ. And it's great because there are these moments where he's like, I think I'm going to shave my beard today. And his mom's like, no, don't shave. So you're like all these things that you think, and like he's at Cana and he's like having a nice time. And his mom's like, they're out of wine. He's like, I don't want to have to do a miracle. Don't bother me. And she's like, goes away. Then she comes back. She's like, please, there's no wine. He's like, all right, I guess. And it's like, it's hilarious because you're like, it makes you think like, yeah, that's someone who's like funny and human and could have some followers.
And maybe Mary just has a drinking problem. Like I can't go through this wedding without wine. I'm dying. I'm shaking. I need wine.
Right. That would have been funny too. Yeah.
Well, Todd, we've said it all. Maybe, this has been terrific. It's been fun. And I can't recommend the book enough, Embracing Alienation, Why We Shouldn't Try to Find Ourselves. The book has been a gift to me. And so is the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Scott. As always, I love talking to you.
Thanks again for coming on the show.